"No," said Dane. "You are the father of our folk, and we have bled for you, and will again. But we will not enter Khazad-dûm. You will not enter Khazad-dûm. Only I have looked through the shadow of the gate. Beyond the shadow it waits for you still, Durin's bane. The world must change, and some other power than ours must come before Durin's folk walk again in Moria."
Well met, friends. Yoiston here with a new kind of topic for you all today. I've been wanting to make a series on the battles and wars in the Legendarium for quite some time now, and many of you have asked for more content involving the dwarves, so I thought why not start with the War of the Dwarves and Orcs. Let's delve right into it. First, let's talk about some of the facts and statistics regarding this war that took place roughly 200 years before the events of the Lord of the Rings. This particular war consisted of two opposing factions, the Orcs of the Misty Mountains and the Dwarves of all 7 houses of their kin. Obviously, the royal line of Durin, called the Longbeards, took part in this war. Alongside them were the Firebeards, Broadbeams, Blacklocks, Stonefoots, Ironfists, and Stiffbeards. I'll talk more in depth about these factions in a future video in the coming weeks. These 7 houses of the dwarves were led by their lords into this war, after the news spread about Thror's death, years after Smaug's attack on the Lonely Mountain. The rage of the dwarven folk is not something to be trifled with. Speaking of their lords, the greatest commanders of the dwarves were King Thrain II, his son Thorin, who would be known as Oakenshield, and his cousin Nain, Lord of the Iron Hills. The leader of the opposing orcs was Azog, the king of the Orcs of Moria. Now that we have some of these facts in mind, let's get into the story of it all. The War of the Dwarves and Orcs started in 2793 of the Third Age, 23 years after Smaug had attacked Erebor. But the greatest hostilities started 3 years before the war actually began. After the fall of Erebor, King Thror, grandfather of Thorin, wandered the wilds of Middle-earth. He and his friend Nar were impoverished, and Thror stooped ever deeper into despair as he wore one of the 7 dwarven rings of power, and it is likely that Sauron's influence in this ring drove him mad. Eventually, Thror desired to look upon the ancestral halls of Khazad-dûm, or Moria, as it was now called. Thror and his friend Nar came over the Redhorn Pass from the fields and forests of Arigian, Enedwaith, and Dunland onto the east side of Khazad-dûm. When they reached the east door, Thror bid his friend Nar to stay while he entered alone. Despite Nar's best attempts to persuade him not to go, Thror entered anyways. After one day, Thror was found by goblins in an armory, and he was accused of thievery and taken to their leader Azog. He was tortured for 2 more days, while Nar hid outside the gate, and eventually Thror was slain in a very brutal way. For more details on this, look in Appendix A in the books, as I should not discuss it here. Anyways, Azog inscribed his name on Thror's head, in the dwarven language of Khazad-dûm, and after showing it and the other remains of his master to Nar, Azog gave him a bag of coins as a final insult. Even though Thror's remains were never recovered, Nar was let go with the bag of coins as a messenger to tell his kin what had happened. This bag of coins will become more important later on. After the dwarves of Middle-earth heard the news of this, they mustered their armies, for this was the greatest insult the orcs had ever made against the dwarves, as they had killed the heir of the eldest house. The dwarves gathered for 3 years, and they were made ready to march on the orcs of the Misty Mountains, and so they did. One of the 2 named battles that we get is the sacking of Mount Gundabad, and this likely happened in the first few years after the war had started. Mount Gundabad was a holy place for the dwarves, as this is where Durin I had awoken in the first age of the world. But the orcs had long since defiled it, and so the dwarves obliterated every orc or goblin they could get their hands on. After this siege, none were left in Mount Gundabad, as the fury of the dwarven houses had been unleashed. Dwarves are, by nature, underground dwellers and warriors, so they were alone in this war, and other free peoples had not joined them. Besides, this was a personal vendetta, and it could only be avenged by the dwarves. Many other unnamed and undetailed battles took place in this war over the next 6 years, and many skirmishes took place in different colonies, mines, and strongholds throughout the Misty Mountains. Finally, in 2799 of the Third Age, the Battle of Azanulbizar, or the Battle of Dimral Dale, took place. At this point, the only orc stronghold left in the Misty Mountains was Moria, and here, where this all began 9 years before with the death of Thror, is where it would end. At this point, there were likely only 6,000 to 10,000 dwarves left to fight, while there was an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 orcs. Even so, the dwarves marched onwards. In the early winter morning, the dwarves pushed towards the gate of Khazad-dûm, while orcs poured out of Moria and the Misty Mountains. In the woods near the Lake Miromir, King Thrain led the first vanguard, and his youngest son Frerin was slain, as was Fundin, father of Balin. Thorin was also wounded, taking up an oaken branch as his shield, and Thrain lost his eye. Yet, even as the battle raged onward, reinforcements from the Iron Hills came with all of the fire and fury of Aule's forge. Nain and his dwarves cut through the enemy lines with their mattocks, shouting the name of their enemy, Azog. These dwarves came for their enemy, and as Nain reached the stairs leading into Khazad-dûm, he called for Azog to come forth. However, Nain was exhausted, and his fury betrayed him, and Azog slew yet another dwarf. His victory was short-lived, for Azog looked out among the devastation, and saw that his entire army was routed by the dwarves. With his personal guards already slain, Azog ran back towards the halls of Khazad-dûm, seeing that his end was at hand. Dain, son of Nain, leapt up the stairs towards his foe, and with his famous red axe, the Ironfoot brought a swift end to Azog, the king of the Orcs of Moria. This was an amazing feat for the young dwarf of 32 years old, and the battle was ended. Dain looked within Moria at that moment, however, and he saw there a demon of shadow and flame. Seeing Durin's bane, Dain knew that Moria would never be reclaimed while that evil still lived, and he told King Thrain as much. The dwarves had suffered greatly in this battle, and lost many of their warriors, but the orcs had suffered worse. The head of Azog was staked, and inside his mouth Dain placed the bag of coins that the orc had given Nar years before, after he killed Thror. The dwarves took the belongings of their fallen friends, so that the orcs could not plunder them, and thus they had ceremony and fire in reverence to their kin. None would follow Thrain into Moria, and so the king and Thorin, and many other dwarves adventured back to Dunland, eventually coming to settle in the Blue Mountains. And so it was that the dwarves dispersed, and went back to their homes, and the orcs were not seen again in those parts for many years to come. The dwarves had won, and even though this war cost them greatly, they had made much of Middle-earth safe for many years to come. This war, even in its grim evil, depicts what it means to seek justice, to honor the memory of people from yesterday and save those tomorrow. Sometimes we must struggle today, even in the face of dreadful opposition, to emerge in victory. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed today's story. If you did, please hit that like button and share this video with a friend. Also, if you would like to read more about this, check out Appendix A in The Return of the King, under the Durin's Folk section. Let me know your thoughts on the War of the Dwarves and Orcs in the comments below, and also let me know what other wars in the Legendarium you would like to see covered. If you'd like to contact me more directly, please join us on Facebook and Twitter through the links in the description below, and subscribe to join the Men of the West and all of the free peoples today. I will see you all next weekend with a video on the Oathbreakers of Middle-earth, so please look out for that. As always, thank you all for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one, my friends.